Verses 13 to 17. The parallel that the apostle runs between the communication of sin and death by the first Adam and of righteousness and life by the second Adam, v. 12, to the end, which not only illustrates the truth he is discoursing of, but tends very much to the commending of the love of God and the comforting of the hearts of true believers, in showing a correspondence between our fall and our recovery, and not only alike, but a much greater power in the second Adam to make us happy, than there was in the first to make us miserable. Now, for the opening of this, observe a general truth laid down as the foundation of his discourse, that Adam was a type of Christ, v. 14, who is the figure of him that was to come. Christ is therefore called the last Adam. Compare v. 22. In this Adam was a type of Christ, that in the covenant transactions that were between God and him, and in the consequent events of those transactions, Adam was a public person. God dealt with Adam, and Adam acted as such a one, as a common father and factor, root and representative, of and for all his posterity, so that what he did in that station, as agent for us, we may be said to have done in him, and what was done to him may be said to have been done to us in him. Thus Jesus Christ, the mediator, acted as a public person, the head of all the elect, dealt with God for them, as their father, factor, root and representative, died for them, rose for them, entered within the veil for them, did all for them. When Adam failed, we failed with him. When Christ performed, he performed for us. Thus was Adam typos tou melantus, the figure of him that was to come to repair that breach which Adam had made. A more particular explication of the parallel, in which observe how Adam, as a public person, communicated sin and death to all his posterity, v. 12, by one man sin entered. We see the world under a deluge of sin and death, full of iniquities and full of calamities. Now, it is worthwhile to inquire what is the spring that feeds it, and you will find it to be the general corruption of nature, and at what gap it entered, and you will find it to have been Adam's first sin. It was by one man, and he the first man, for if any had been before him they would have been free, that one man from whom, as from the root, we all spring. By him sin entered. When God pronounced all very good, General 131, there was no sin in the world. It was when Adam ate forbidden fruit that sin made its entry. Sin had before entered into the world of angels, when many of them revolted from their allegiance and left their first estate, but it never entered into the world of mankind till Adam sinned. Then it entered as an enemy, to kill and destroy, as a thief, to rob and despoil, and a dismal entry it was. Then entered the guilt of Adam's sin imputed to posterity, and a general corruption and depravedness of nature. Foho for that, so we read it, rather in whom all have sinned. Sin entered into the world by Adam, for in him we all sinned. As in Adam all die, so here, in him all have sinned, for it is agreeable to the law of all nations that the acts of a public person be accounted theirs whom they represent, and what a whole body does every member of the same body may be said to do. Now Adam acted thus as a public person, by the sovereign ordination and appointment of God, and yet that founded upon a natural necessity, for God, as the author of nature, had made this the law of nature, that man should beget in his own likeness, and so the other creatures. In Adam therefore, as in a common receptacle, the whole nature of man was reposite, from him to flow down in a channel to his posterity, for all mankind are made of one blood, Acts 17:26, so that according as this nature proves through his standing or falling, before he puts it out of his hands, accordingly it is propagated from him. Adam therefore sinning and falling, the nature became guilty and corrupt, and is so derived. Thus in him all have sinned. Death by sin, for death is the wages of sin. Sin, when it is finished, brings forth death. When sin came, of course death came with it. Death is here put for all that misery which is the due desert of sin, temporal, spiritual, eternal death. If Adam had not sinned, he had not died, the threatening was, in the day thou eatest thou shalt surely die. So death passed, that is, a sentence of death was passed, as upon a criminal, dialed and passed through all men, as an infectious disease passes through a town, so that none escape it. It is the universal fate, without exception, death passes upon all. There are common calamities incident to human life which do abundantly prove this. Death reigned, v. 14. He speaks of death as a mighty prince, and his monarchy the most absolute, universal, and lasting monarchy. None are exempted from its scepter. It is a monarchy that will survive all other earthly rule, authority, and power, for it is the last enemy. Those sons of Belial that will be subject to no other rule cannot avoid being subject to this. Now all this we may thank Adam for, from him sin and death descend. Well may we say, as that good man, observing the change that a fit of sickness had made in his countenance, O Adam, what hast thou done? Further, to clear this, he shows that sin did not commence with the law of Moses, but was in the world until, or before, that law. Therefore that law of Moses is not the only rule of life, for there was a rule, and that rule was transgressed, before the law was given. It likewise intimates that we cannot be justified by our obedience to the law of Moses, any more than we were condemned by and for our disobedience to it. Sin was in the world before the law, witness Cain's murder, the apostasy of the old world, the wickedness of Sodom. His inference hence is, therefore there was a law, for sin is not imputed where there is no law. Original sin is a want of conformity to, and actual sin is a transgression of, the law of God, therefore all were under some law. His proof of it is, death reigned from Adam to Moses, v. 14. It is certain that death could not have reigned if sin had not set up the throne for him. This proves that sin was in the world before the law, an original sin, for death reigned over those that had not sinned any actual sin, that had not sinned after the similitude of Adam's transgression, never sinned in their own persons as Adam did, which is to be understood of infants, that were never guilty of actual sin, and yet died, because Adam's sin was imputed to them. This reign of death seems especially to refer to those violent and extraordinary judgments which were long before Moses, as the deluge and the destruction of Sodom, which involved infants. It is a great proof of original sin that little children, who were never guilty of any actual transgression, are yet liable to very terrible diseases, casualties, and deaths, which could by no means be reconciled with the justice and righteousness of God if they were not chargeable with guilt. How, in correspondence to this, Christ, as a public person, communicates righteousness and life to all true believers, who are his spiritual seed. And in this he shows not only wherein the resemblance holds, but, ex abundanti, wherein the communication of grace and love by Christ goes beyond the communication of guilt and wrath by Adam.